the FRA. What's the FRA doing to review the performance of Wayside detection technologies, railroad standards for an emergency notification, and emergency response procedures?
So these Wayside detection devices are installed alongside tracks, and they can provide advance warning when there are issues that couldn't be detected by other means. Not all derailments are caused by an issue in the rail. Sometimes it's an issue on board. This is something that historically has not been the subject of federal regulation, although we did put out a safety advisory in the wake of the East Palestine case from FRA regarding this. But we have seen them deployed by a number of railroads and are interested in working with Congress as well as examining our existing authorities to create more regularity and standardization about the use of these tools, because we think they can play an important role in preventing crashes and derailments.
And I think that's perfect. I think we're going to have to get our lawyers together to figure out whether you have all the authorities you need, and if so, then we'll push you to utilize those authorities to get some sort of standardization. But if you need statutory authority, I don't think this is particularly controversial that each railroad should not have their own boutique version of this. This is a safety question, and there should be standards across the industry. I just want to talk to you about airport resiliency. The short version of this is that lots of runways are going to be facing coastal inundation. And so this is not a climate policy question, right? That's not the jurisdiction of this committee. But to the extent that the sea level is rising, that has impacts across the country in our airports. Do you have the authority you need to help airports to respond to that? And are you doing enough to encourage airports to recognize whatever your politics are about energy policy or this or that or the Inflation Reduction Act? The very pragmatic question in front of us is how do we prevent sea level rise from damaging our airports?
Well, we're certainly doing all we can with the authorities that we have. The FAA supports airport sponsors that include resiliency in their master planning effort, and those master plans are eligible for funding through AIP. And we're certainly encouraging those airports, those project sponsors, to work with their local district offices to develop scope of analyses dealing with resiliency that may not have been contemplated specifically in the past. The 23 enacted appropriation gave FAA the authority to use supplemental funds specifically to address resiliency, and we'd welcome opportunities to work with Congress to continue that kind of support, because I believe the need for attention to resiliency affecting all of our infrastructure, certainly affecting airports, is only going to grow each passing year.
Yeah, I just want to point out, the model here is the DOD, right? The DOD doesn't get to have an opinion necessarily about climate action or whatever, but they have bases and installations, and they don't have the luxury of pretending that there aren't some issues, especially with our Navy bases. Moving on to some tribal issues. A real barrier for tribes to access federal competitive grants is the cost share requirement. Would you support expanding the cost share waiver proposed in the budget more broadly to FTA competitive programs for tribes?
Yes, we have this in the tribal transit formula and competitive programs, but not other FTA programs. And when I'm meeting with tribal leaders when we're traveling in Indian country, we hear this refrain again and again and again. Sometimes 20% of those projects would not always look like a large figure from a Washington perspective, but to those tribes, it could be the difference between a project happening and not happening. So we would love to work on that.
The IIJA requires NITSA to finalize a rule on impaired driving. Are we on time? Can you give me an update, please?
Yeah, so NITSA will soon be posting an annual report that's going to share more detailed information on the rulemaking status, and I'm going to defer to that report on anticipated timelines. But what I can tell you is that NITSA is working very hard to develop the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, including on areas like the impaired driving detection technology, which is novel and different from the kinds of things that they have prescribed in the past, but that we recognize the urgency, importance, and interest of, given its potential to prevent crashes and fatalities. Final question.
The President in his State of the Union said, quote, "And when we do projects, we're going to buy American." Buy American has been the law of the land since 1933, but for far too long, past administrations have found a way to get around it. Not anymore. You are about to give out billions in federal funds through grants to many agencies. Do we have your commitment to comply with Buy America, which is statutory, but also with what the President is saying about actually complying and not just having every agency waive the statute?
Yes, not only has, as you noted, this law has been on the books for a long time, but the president is exceptionally, I would argue, historically focused on making sure that we buy America, and that's something you'll see throughout the administration.
Thank you. Senator Heitzman.